Good, lovely day to you, wonderful people out there. How are you this very day? It is almost the middle of April. Wow, it's just flying by. Today's newscast is going to be a little bit different from my other newscasts. I'm going to kind of break them up today because I have more targeted information that I need to be talking about, and it's a lot of information at once, so I got to dole it out in different videos. So this is going to be a one topic newscast today. So I have come up with a nickname for Camel Harris. I'm calling her now the Cackle Queen. I don't know how uncomfortable a human being has to be inside of their own skin to cackle and laugh all the time. What is she so embarrassed about? Why does it make me feel awkward watching her laugh? There comes a point where the deluded mind has, if you go down the path of wickedness and sinfulness for so long, there's only so much you can do with your conscience. Your conscience becomes seared after a point in time. But doesn't the Bible tell us about this? If you keep continuing in your sin, your consciousness is seared. It can't process and give you direction and guidance into righteousness if you override its command, if you override its ability to help guide you through life without causing terrible destruction around you. So I believe that Kamala Harris is the supreme example right now of watching a seared mind try to deal with the ramifications of the choices she's making in her life. She knows it's affecting millions and millions of people, and her mind cannot process the damage that she is doing while she is in this office. I mean, obviously, you see that her aides are dropping like flies around her. They don't even want to be around her anymore. So, Cackle Harris is her new nickname. What will the nations of the earth look like if the earth only had 3 months' supply of food left? If production stops, do you realize that humanity would have nothing to eat after 90 days? This was a thought-provoking article by Michael Snyder, and it made me realize that when God said that the black horse that was coming to the earth after having the third seal opened, it would bring basically famine, and that everything would be increased as a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. God has already forewarned us that there is going to be inflation that is so incredible, and that all of the supply chains and the ability to even grow food on the earth is going to be decreased rapidly. Folks, a lot of people are not talking about this, so I have to pipe in my 2 cents. We are still in La Nina years. We've been doing this for 3 consecutive years in a row. Last summer here in Alaska, it rained almost every day in summer. There was maybe 1 or 2 days consecutively that we may not have had rain at all and saw actually some sunshine. The temperatures here in Alaska were relatively colder than when I had first moved here since 2019, which is a really hot year. I actually saw some record breakers and from the heat index, and also there was lots of fires at that time. But since that year, we have been under La Nina, also coupled with the grand solar minimum that is coming. Folks, what's coming upon the earth right now is absolutely biblical. I really can't stress this enough, that God is about ready to intervene in mankind's affairs, and he is coming to bring the kingdom of God to this earth. Most people find it very hard to imagine, or they dare not even imagine, how close we are to a earth-shattering cataclysm. From leaders all across the political spectrum, now they're openly warning about this worldwide food crisis coming, and people are starting to get scared, and they're starting to wake up, and food is starting to disappear rapidly from the shelves, so much so that they can't replace quick enough the supply that is now dwindling. David Friedberg is an early Google executive who started the farming insurance company Climate Corporation. And he just told in an All In podcast that the earth operates on a 90-day food supply. And he quotes, "The whole planet Earth operates a 90-day food supply. That means that once we stop making food, humans run out of food in 90 days. So it's estimated approximately 7.9 billion people currently live on Earth, and that feeding everyone is being made a challenge. And why do I say it's being made a challenge? Is because the Great Reset, Davos, Luciferian folks out there really just want to destroy over 3/4 of the world's population. I mean it. Go look at the Georgia Guidestones and see what their very number one commandment is to put all of the population of Earth under 500 million people. Guess what? Probably you and I are not going to be a part of that crowd. Notice that the price of nitrogen has gone from $200 to $1,000, potassium $200 to $700, phosphorus $250 to $700, and so now it's so expensive to grow a crop that farmers are just shrugging their shoulders and saying, we're pulling acres out of production because we can't afford to do it. So how are farmers all over the world going to grow food without fertilizer this year? Obviously, these are mainstream farmers who are dealing with high yield production crops. And the only way they're able to get good fruit from these crops is to use fertilizers and pesticides. Just comparing some slides from the presentation, nitrogen and phosphorus required for good yields. I mean, there's no comparison when you put rice side by side, one with nitrogen and phosphorus being fed to it and one that is not. Those yields are decreased by almost a factor of 90%, folks. You're not going to get much without these nutrients that now are being kept from the farmers throughout every nation on the earth right now. So this tip of power that is coming on the earth, which I find very biblical and interesting, is why America is diminishing super fast right now. And for whatever reasons, it's that the public has not been educated enough in order to fire the people who are destroying our country. And yes, the American people have the right to do that, but they are not taking action right now. And only so few people have the information needed. And it's taking so long to educate the masses that it's almost going to be inevitably too late. I'm sorry to have to say that, but folks, America's not found in biblical prophecy when the book of Revelation starts. When the 7-year tribulation starts, America is not there, not present. And the nations of this earth, these rising 10 kings now that are coming up out of Europe and through Russia, Asia, and all of these other areas, They are now forming contracts and treaties amongst themselves, especially Saudi Arabia and Israel. Also, Israel and the UAE just finalized their milestone free trade deal. And while all of these agreements, these treaties are being made without the petrodollar and without America, America is probably going to see a huge event attack it. I'm not really sure how that's going to come into play, folks, but the world and the nations must remove America and any possibility of our retribution. We must be completely moved out of the way in order for the 10 nations to rise to power and the Antichrist to be revealed. This is another reason why we are seeing wealthy nations changing their monetary system, and they're buying up all the produce that they can possibly get their hands on. They're buying up everything. So much so that certain countries like Brazil, I believe even Argentina, have basically told China, no, we can't sell you anymore lest we won't have enough for ourselves. And unfortunately, the poorer nations are going to be left out in the cold, and that means America, folks, unfortunately. In March, the international price of food rose at the fastest monthly pace that was ever recorded. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, FAO, printed 159.3 points in March, up from 19.15 points from February, when it had already reached record highs. The index was up 33.6% from the same time last year. The March rise in food prices is a stunning 12.64%, which almost doubled the previous record month surge. These are red flags, folks. Food riots have already begun. Peru is just one of the latest flare-ups. Can you find any other way that this war in Ukraine could not have come to pass, folks? They're really pushing for this, and believe me, Putin is a part of this great reset, just as Xi Jinping is. All of these world leaders, these guys, they are ready to be kings, and they want their crown for that 1 hour with the Antichrist. They know this is coming. The war in Ukraine has increased the price of wheat to 20% in 1 month alone. Russia and Ukraine normally export the enormous amounts of food to the rest of the nations of the earth. And sadly, it is being projected that corn production in Ukraine is going to be cut by more than half. So this will be a 50% decline in crop output this year, and that is according to Bloomberg. And so the UKR Agro Consult shows Ukraine's corn output will be as low as 19 million tons, which is about half of last year's 41 million tons. And on top of that, Ukrainians have already announced that they will not be exporting any of their production at all this year because they need it to feed their own population. And again, I keep warning everyone, and the word is getting out. And folks, it's getting late. I mean, you are late to the table and the food is almost gone but please keep continuing to prepare because of what's happening in the United States. This bird flu pandemic is escalating out of control. And among these are the price of eggs, which has just doubled in recent weeks. I got a message from McMurray Hatchery because I am signed up to their newsletter. Unfortunately, if you have not gotten your little chicks for spring, they may be hard to come by right now. McMurray Hatchery is down to 6 breeds that they are allowing people to still purchase from their online store. The other breeds, the heritage breeds, we're talking like the Brahmas and Rhode Island Reds and the Americanas and all the birds that they produce, these genetic strains, folks. The Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship and the United States Department of Agricultural officials basically rated their facility. From what I understand, they were compliant. McMurray Hatchery was totally compliant with them, and they eradicated a large majority of their birds. They called them because these fake PCR tests ended up saying that, yes, you have the avian influenza here, and so they basically are not selling any more of their heritage breed genetic strains because they have to repopulate now their own flocks. Folks, this is getting serious. If you go to McMurray Hatchery's actual website, they have released a series of information, the HPAI FAQ, frequently asked questions, and one of them is the 2022 shipping restrictions now that are in place. In Canada, no more shipping or transporting of live birds into Canada until further notice. All those customers will be affected, are going to be contacted, and Hawaii is now shut down. They are not shipping any birds there. I pretty much am sure that Alaska is going to make that list here soon. They actually, instead of going through Canada to ship birds to Alaska, they could use the ferry system through Washington State. But I don't know how that's going to happen, but things are getting shut down all around us, folks. Please wake up. If you have land, if you know someone who has land and they're willing to keep birds for you and you kind of share like a 50-50 with the people, however you want to work it out, right now is the time to get yourselves in order, to get your house in order, to make sure you have food and to make sure you are able to feed those birds, to take care of them so that they can take care of you. Folks, these hatcheries are starting to get shut down. They also stated in one of their sites that I read, one of their informations, is that they were predicting, this is McMurray Hatchery was predicting that they were not going to be able to replenish their birds until spring of next year, folks. This is how intense this is. Because remember, for chicks to grow up and to poults, it takes like 6 to 8 months, depending on the breed, for them to start even laying eggs and for them to become promiscuous, I should say, with their little rooster friends. And having baby chicks takes almost a whole year for that process to happen. And folks, if they culled almost, 60, 70, even 80% of their flocks, they were damaged big time. And it could be more than a year before they get back up and running again. So folks, time to wake your butts up and get going. So eggs, just egg-laying hens right now for retailers, it is in the Midwest, I guess it was around $2.80 for a dozen. And now it's basically up to $3.50 a dozen. Up here in Alaska, it is more than $4 a dozen right now. And that's just for the regular eggs. These are not from the farm fresh, free-ranged, organic types of chicken eggs either. So this is extremely alarming, folks. I hate being the bearer of bad news and I hate this fear porn. But if you don't realize what's going on, you are going to do without. The other thing I want to mention is if you do have poultry and you have them free ranging outside and you're in an area where your neighbors might actually tattle on you, you might want to think about covering those birds or putting them in some sort of type of enclosure where it's covered so that if your neighbors rat on you and you all of a sudden have the food and agricultural people come show up at your house and they want to test your birds, that you would be able to have at least some way to fight against them actually culling your entire flocks. Folks, I don't know what to say anymore. This is getting crazy. Also, the coming shortages is going to affect your children, your babies. Walgreens has just announced that it is going to start rationing baby formula. So their statement is a national shortage of baby formula brought on by pandemic-related supply chain issues has forced U.S. retailers such as Walgreens to ration the all-important product. So the company, the second largest pharmacy store chain in the U.S. behind CVS, said Friday that amid the supply chain crunch, it is limiting customers to 3 infant and toddler formula products purchases at this time. And that's at all 9,021 U.S. locations. Out of the Daily Mail, 29% of all top-selling formulas are now out of stock at stores across the nation. Unfortunately, folks, this is just the beginning. David Friedberg stated months ahead of all of this, and I quote, "I don't know about death. There will be famine. Famine is to be short of calories. There will be a strategic reserves released, but it won't be enough. We won't have enough. The way supply chains are set up, there will not be enough," he said. As you know, with any market, when there is scarcity, people come in and buy at a faster pace. So this is a market dynamic. It is not like people are physically hoarding loaves of bread, but commodity traders, countries, and strategic reserves start buying up what they can get to prepare for the famine. Prices go even higher and it kicks other people out of the market. The whole thing gets ugly fast. It's unfortunate, but most of the population is still not taking this crisis seriously. So many people out there are still fully convinced that they will always be able to rely on the system. And a lot of them will continue to believe that even as the system literally collapses around them, folks. Talk about your house being on fire and you're not even aware of it. So, folks, we've read about this before and it occurred. Famines have occurred in human history since time began. And for 4,000 or 5,000 years, it's been going on. I want to answer one of the critics I had the other day, talking about scaremongering. God bless her little soul. So people are so confused about God's role in their lives and their personal role in their lives. So folks, sometimes God blesses you, don't get me wrong, just out of the blue, there it is. But most of the time, God's only going to help you if you help yourself. Again, it gets into that free will thing where it's not just a blessing, but if you're against it, or if you're unbelieving, he can't force his way into your life and redirect and guide you in the way that you need to go. You've got to be actually a contributing counterpart to this relationship you have with the Almighty in heaven. So this quaint little lady decided to tell me that I was a fearmonger and she wished that I would stop telling people to stock up and prepare because I was going against God and that I was leading people away from actually relying on the Lord to provide for my every need. And my response to her was, "Thou shalt not test God," and promptly showed her how God made Joseph great in Egypt by allowing him to save not only Egypt, the Egyptian people, but his own people. And he had put so much away that even the surrounding countries were able to partake of this goodness during the greatest famine that had happened at that time. So Genesis chapter 41, verse 51. Actually, let's start in 53. When the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began just as Joseph had said. And although there was famine in every country, there was food throughout the land of Egypt. When extreme hunger came to all the land of Egypt and the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." So let's talk about Joseph's successful management of the food crisis. Joseph immediately went about the work to which Pharaoh had appointed him. His primary interest was in getting the job done for others, rather than taking personal advantage of his new position at the head of the royal court. He maintained his faith in Yahweh, giving his children names that credited God with healing his emotional pain and making him fruitful. That's in Genesis 41, verses 51 through 52. He did recognize that this wisdom and discernments that he received were gifts from God, but nevertheless that he still had much to learn about the land of Egypt, its agricultural industry in particular. As the senior administrator, Joseph's work touched on nearly every practical area in the nation's life. His office would have required that he learned much about legislation, communication, negotiation, transportation, safe and efficient methods of food storage, building, economic strategizing and forecasting, also record keeping, payroll, the handling of transactions, both by means of currency and bartering, human resources, and the acquisition of real estate. His extraordinary abilities with respect to Yahweh and people did not operate in separate domains. The genius of Joseph's success lay in the effective integration of his divine gifts and acquired competencies. For Joseph, all of his was godly work. Pharaoh was already characterized Joseph as discerning and wise, Genesis 41, verse 39. And these characteristics enable Joseph to do the work of strategic planning and administration. The Hebrew words for wise and wisdom, so the Hebrew word for wise is Strong's H2450, chacham, and wisdom is Strong's H2449, chacham. These two words denote a high level of mental perceptivity, but are also used of a wide range of practical skills, which include craftsmanship of wood, precious stones, and metal, tailoring, even administration and legal justice. Skills that are found among unbelievers as well, but the wise in the Bible enjoy a special blessing of Yahweh, who intends Israel to display God's ways to the nation. You can find that in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6. As his first act, Joseph went through all the land of Egypt on an inspection tour, and that's Genesis 41, verse 46. He would have become familiar with the people who managed agriculture, the locations, conditions of the field, the crops, the roads, the means of transportation. It is inconceivable that Joseph could have accomplished all of this at a personal level. He would have had to establish and oversee and trained what basically amounted to the Department of Agricultural and Revenue. So during these 7 years of abundant harvest, Joseph had grain stored in cities. That's Genesis 41, verses 48 through 49. During the 7 lean years that followed, Joseph dispensed grain to the Egyptians and other people who were affected by the widespread famine to create and administer all of this while surviving the political intrigue of the absolute monarchy. Required exceptional talent. He really had to be on his game, folks. Just imagine those little Nancy Pelosi's running around there and the psychopathic demon rats that were running around all of Pharaoh's people back then as well. The people ended up running out of money, which we're almost right there, folks. I don't know about how you guys feel, but I feel like we're right there. Joseph allowed them to barter their livestock for food at that point, which we may actually be doing that by the end of this year, 2022. This plan did last for 1 year, during which Joseph collected horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. He would have had to determine the value of these animals and establish an equitable system for exchange. When food is scarce, people are especially concerned for the survival of themselves and their loved ones, obviously. So at this point, providing access to points of food distribution and treating people even-handedly became acutely important for his administrative matters. When all of the livestock had been traded, people willingly sold themselves into slavery at this point, folks. This is coming, okay? And I believe that this is coming with the one world currency. If you take the mark of the beast, folks, you are initially selling yourself into slavery, and you are selling yourself basically to quote unquote Pharaoh, which is why I believe God does not want anything to do with people who take the mark of the beast ever again. Not just that, but I also believe the mark of the beast is going to change a human being into something else, which is going to totally erase him from being made in the image of God. Also, can you imagine what Joseph was feeling and what he had to experience and what his night's rest were? Did he even sleep at night watching people sell themselves into slavery just so that they could eat? I mean, that's selling your children, and yeah, it's your mom and your dad or your sister, your brother. I mean, it got that bad, folks, and he had to witness all of this. He even allowed people to sell their land and enter into servitude, but he did not take advantage of them in their powerlessness. This is why it's so important to have a godly man in charge of all things. Joseph would have had to see that these properties were valued correctly in exchange for seeds for planting. That's in Genesis chapter 47, verse 23. He enacted an enduring law that people return 20% of the harvest to Pharaoh. This entailed creating a system to monitor and enforce the people's compliance with the law and establishing a department dedicated to managing the revenue. In all of this, Joseph exempted the priestly families from selling their land because Pharaoh supplied them with a fixed allotment of food to meet their needs adequately. This handling the special population would have entailed having a smaller, distinct system of distribution that was just tailored for them. Poverty and its consequences are economic realities. Our first duty is to help eliminate them, but we cannot expect complete success until God's kingdom is fulfilled, however. Believers may not have the power to eliminate the circumstances that require people to make these hard choices, but we can find ways to support people as they, or perhaps even ourselves, have to learn how to cope with these things. Choosing the lesser of these two evils may be necessary, and they are going to come with some emotional ramifications that could be very devastating. In our work, folks, we may experience tensions arising from feeling the empathy that we're going to see for the needy, yet we have to bear the responsibility to do what is good for the people and the organizations that we do work for, whether that be a market, farmer's market, or maybe it's a co-op, whatever we're doing. Joseph experienced God's guidance in these difficult tasks, and we also have received God's promise that I will never leave you or forsake you, Hebrews 13, verse 5. Folks, there's the other thing I want you to realize is that while this was all going on in Egypt, God's blessing for the people of Israel came only after his blessing for foreigners came. God did not raise up an Israelite in the land of Israel to provide for Israel's relief during that famine. Instead, God enabled Joseph, working in and through the Egyptian government, to provide for the needs of the people of Israel. Nonetheless, I don't think anybody should idolize Joseph. As an official in sometimes repressive societies, He became part of its power structure. He really didn't have a choice in the matter, and the situation actually commanded it. And he personally imposed slavery on uncounted numbers of people. That's in Genesis chapter 47, verse 21. Joseph's management of this food crisis, it really shows forth the effect of the family of Israel than in developing principles for effective management. Regardless of that, to the degree, basically Joseph's extraordinary leadership serves an example for us today as the future leaders that will be needed to rise up during these trying times. What are some of the practical applications we can learn from his work? Become as familiar as possible with the state of affairs as they exist at the beginning of your service. If you're going to stand up and be a leader in your community or amongst your people, this is one of the trademarks that you've got to have. Because if you don't know what the heck is going on around you, or you're not into politics and trying to navigate the narratives out there, you're not in the know and you shouldn't be talking. Pray for discernment regarding the future so that you can make wise plans. So very important. I almost thought about putting that before the second one, but prayer is important. But if you don't know what to pray for, then you don't know what you're talking about when you go before God in your prayer closet. So, number 3, commit yourself to God first, and then expect Him to direct and establish your plans. Count on it, folks. Number 4, gratefully and appropriately acknowledge the gifts God has given you. Number 5, even though others recognize God's presence in your life and the special talents you have, do not broadcast these in a self-serving effort to gain respect. Number 6, educate yourself about how to do your job and carry it out with excellence. Number 7, seek the practical good for others, knowing that God has placed you where you are to be a blessing. Number 8, be fair in all of your dealings, especially when the circumstances are grim and deeply problematic. Number 9, although your exemplary service may propel you to prominence, remember your founding mission as God's servant. Your life does not consist in what you gain for yourself. Number 10, value the godliness of the myriads types of honorable work that society needs. Number 11, generously extend the fruit of your labor as widely as possible to those who truly need it, regardless of what you think of them as individuals. Accept the fact, number 12, that God may bring you into a particular field of work under extremely challenging conditions. This does not mean that something has gone terribly wrong or that you are out of God's will. It just means that you've got to have a focus on the job that lies ahead of you. Number 13, have courage that God will fit you for that task. Number 14, accept the fact that sometimes people must choose what they regard as the better of two very unpleasant yet unavoidable situations. Number 15, believe that what you do will not only benefit those whom you see and meet, but also that your work has the potential to touch lives for many generations to come. God is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ever ask or imagine. Ephesians 3, verse 20. I hope this message has blessed you today. Do not fear. Use that fear and turn it into energy and be productive. Folks, it's time to get back to the basics. Learn how to forage. Learn how to can what you forage. Learn how to preserve those foods for a lifetime ahead. What is really important to me is keeping of Shemitah. It has trained me well through my many multiple failures in my first year of doing it in 2014 and 2015. I learned how to live off a whole year's supply of food, and I really learned a lot from that. This is my second time keeping Shemitah, and I've been learning so much more now, because now that I know how to can food through jars and preserving the food that I grew this last year and was able to purchase from the store, I finally was able to understand why God gives you so much in those years leading up to Shemitah, in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year, where he says, I will abundantly bless you, so that you will not only have food for all of Shemitah, but you'll have food for that 2nd and 3rd year ahead of you, so that you can grow food and do the whole process again and store it and eat off of it. You're eating off of the old stores in the first year after Shemitah, and then you're growing food and you're getting a little bit out of that. Then you turn around, you do it again next year, and it's like 50-50. And then in the 3rd year, you're getting the majority of your food from what you grow. It is a really incredible process that I wish people would grasp. How wonderful Shemitah is in the 7th year land of rest. I really wish people would understand that God wants us to know this so much, that he punished his own people from not keeping Shemitah for 70 years. He kicked them out of the land of Israel. Totally kicked them out because they wouldn't keep Shemitah in the land. So folks, how much more is God going to do that to us if we don't start obeying his ways? God doesn't change. He is the same yesterday, today, and he will be forever in the future the same person. I love you all so very dearly. Please keep looking up. Thank you for supporting this channel. I really, really appreciate your kind thoughts and your prayers. Definitely need those at this time. Also, please check out my book. Even if you don't purchase it for yourself, you may find that it may be important for somebody that you know, that may actually give them someone's testimony that might turn them back to God, or to God for the first time. So whatever it is, I love you all. Keep looking up. Our redemption draweth nigh. Maranatha, everyone.